Now, two boxers who were deemed ineligible to box at the World Boxing Championships last year are competing at the Paris Olympic Games. Both also competed at the Tokyo Olympics 3 years ago, but their inclusion in the 2024 Games in Paris is causing controversy given that they were both disqualified from the 2023 World Boxing Championships. Now, the Algerian boxer Khalif yesterday advanced to the quarterfinals of the women's 66 kg category after defeating the Italian boxer Angela Carini in a very controversial circumstance. Now, the Countess advocacy group previously called on the International Olympic Committee to investigate the eligibility of the two boxers to compete. And joining me now is Sorcha Nic Lochlainn, sports spokeswoman with the Countess, to talk to me about this. Sorcha, good morning to you.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm very well indeed. Good to talk to you today. So even before the Olympics kicked off, you had some issues about this. But first of all, will you tell me a little about the advocacy group and who you represent?
Sure. So we are an advocacy group that's set up to advocate for women, children and vulnerable LGBT people in Ireland, specifically around the impact of gender ideology and on our safe spaces, on our words, against child transition and against the erosion and the erasure of lesbian rights specifically. So we campaign on the issue of sport, and our main focus on sport is in maintaining single-sex categories for women, so that the female category is always protected for safety, for fairness and for equal opportunity for women. So that's my role in sport. We have other campaigns running, of course, all the time in different areas, but that's a brief summary, I suppose, of what we do.
You had concerns about this pretty much from the start.
Yeah, so it emerged over the weekend, I think, that these boxers in particular had failed eligibility testing by the International Boxing Association, but were still deemed eligible by the International Olympic Committee because they are women in their passports. And that's what the IOC said on Tuesday in a press conference, and what they've since said in their own statement. So we had concerns around this because these boxers are likely male. The IBA have found them to be male, and they're not eligible to be in the women's category. So that could be for a number of reasons. It's suspected that there's a disorder of sexual development, but it's not known. But our main concern and focus with the Countess and with the other groups who signed our letter is that there's no sex testing. There's no verification that somebody is what they say they are. And there are situations where that is as a result of such a changing your gender identity or whatever, and there are situations where that's as a disorder of development. But in any case, the end result is the same, and the result of that is that there are now boxers who have been through male puberty who are stepping into the ring against women, and that is obviously extremely unsafe, not to mention fairness. So we organised, we're part of an international confederation of female sport as well, and we have links to other groups and individuals across the world. So we wrote to the IOC on Wednesday asking for them to urgently investigate the eligibility of the two boxers and to immediately reinstate cheek swab sex screening for all athletes participating in Paris and in future Olympics, of course, as well, to protect the female category. But unfortunately they declined to respond to the request about sex testing. They did say in a press conference that nobody wanted to go back to the bad old days, which in fact isn't true. We know that most women athletes do actually want to go back to sex screening in order to protect their category, and they stand by their decision to use passport as a basis for verifying gender and age of athletes.
It
doesn't look like...
I beg your pardon, Sorcha. I'm rather confused about this, though, because these two boxers, they weren't. They're not trans, so they weren't men. So we're talking about an issue with chromosomes here, are we? Yes.
So it seems likely, although with the International Boxing Association did not release the results of the specific testing for confidentiality reasons for those boxers. But what seems likely is that these are males with a disorder of sexual development, which means they may have been identified at birth as being female based on their external genitalia, but actually they would go through male puberty and develop male muscular capacity and physical capacities after puberty. They certainly would not go through female puberty and start periods and grow breasts, etc., etc. And it seems, we're kind of left with a situation where it's so unclear that we're relying on what we can see with our eyes, and what we can see is that these athletes appear to be male. And the International Boxing Association have said that they have XY chromosomes. And it was also reported, although not by the IBA, that they had high testosterone, or at least one had high testosterone in the male range, which would confirm that, they're for all intents and purposes men. There are other disorders where you might have an XY, but you would have a female testosterone level and a female body, essentially. But they are much rarer and wouldn't result in an advantage that's as obvious as what these boxers have. So it's a complicated situation.
Sure it is,
but
yeah.
It's been brought about by the IOC's refusal to do any verification on any female athletes.
Does it surprise you to know? And it's just one of the things you mentioned there is judging people on appearance. And it sort of blew up on social media last night because Panty Bliss came out about this. I'm sure you're across that. Yeah. What about that point? Judging people on appearance is kind of dodgy, is it?
It is iffy, of course, but that's what we're left in. That's the situation that the IOC have left us in. So, we are left in the situation where we must believe our eyes because we don't believe what the IOC are saying to us. And therefore, it's not whether or not somebody is, attractive or female enough. But we've been told by another organisation that they have XY chromosomes, that they're not eligible to be in women's boxing. And yet it says on their passport that they're women. So, we're left in this situation where people will make those judgments. That's just normal human behaviour, and we can't help that. The only thing that could help that is if the IOC clarified that they had, in fact, used verification procedures beyond simply looking at somebody's passport, So, I can understand why people are saying, it's basically can't base it on appearances. Yeah, sure, that's a reasonable position.
What do you make
we have to base it on something.
What do you make of athletes and boxing analysts coming out today and making the point that, particularly where the Algerian boxer is concerned, is not a cheat, and making the point that Kelly Harrington, in fact, beat her at the Tokyo Olympics, and also I think one of our other boxers, as far as I know, beat her. I think it was Amy Broadhurst as well. So what does that say to you, Sorcha? Because again, I'm confused here.
Well, I mean, even somebody who is doping won't win everything all the time, right? Right. It doesn't make it less fair. So the fact that Kelly, and Amy boxed this person in the past does not mean that person doesn't have an unfair advantage. It simply means that Kelly and Amy are excellent boxers, and at that time that boxer was not good enough to beat them. And since then the weight category has changed for Khalif, and presumably 3 more years of extra training, extra development, extra physical development, all of that kind of stuff will have an impact in this. Certainly in the fight yesterday, it looked extremely unequal. There were 3 really heavy blows to Karini's face before she stopped the fight. And, you can't base, just because somebody beat them doesn't mean they don't have an unfair advantage. Like, that doesn't make any logical sense to me, and it's not what we should be basing our assessment on.
And that's interesting. Are you annoyed?
Measures like sex testing.
Are you annoyed to see that at this point? I see the way the narrative changes over 24 hours. Now people are looking to Angela Karini's career and saying, sure, look, she wasn't that good anyway. It's interesting the way it's changing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, different people weigh in with different opinions, and I wouldn't be annoyed by that. Everyone is entitled to have something to say about something like this. The reason it's controversial, and the reason that it's in attracting so much interest is simply because of the confusion around whether or not this is actually a fair thing. We believe it's completely unfair. We believe what the IBA said, that these boxers are ineligible. We know that the IOC and also the new organisation World Boxing, who was set up to support the Olympics, that they only look at a passport. So we're left in a situation where really the only thing that would solve this problem is what we called for, which is sex screening of all female athletes, and that would actually resolve the sort of confusion, would resolve the huge stress that people are under, would clarify the situation, and would make it fair and safe for women. And the reason why everyone is so exercised about this is because this is a male person stepping into the ring, punching a woman in the face. Whether or not she's a good boxer is irrelevant. Nobody should be in that situation. A boxer who steps into the ring takes a certain amount of responsibility for the risk under the conditions that she has accepted. And those conditions do not include boxing a male. There's another boxer previously who was in a bout with one of these who said, again, the same thing as Karina, that she'd never experienced anything like it. There are massive differences between male and female physiques under the influence of, the male development under testosterone. That can't be undone. And we have to protect female athletes from this. That's why, our letter was signed by so many from around the world. That's why we'll continue to call for female category restricted to those who are determined to be female, regardless of identity or anything else, and certainly at elite level. This is something that could be tested for once, and it used to be tested for. Over 80% didn't object to the test. It's a simple cheek swab. 94% of female athletes recognised that this was needed, and yet the IOC and other bodies still did away with the testing. It's time to look at it again and bring it back.
And in terms of it being changed and that test no longer being applicable, what's driving that, Sorcha?
So I was looking into this morning, the history of it being changed, because down through the years there was things like there was physical examinations of athletes, there was different screening tests and stuff. So there's some talk that some of them were inaccurate in that they identified athletes with, say, an XY chromosome who don't develop male. I think that was only one athlete, in fact. But ultimately the decision was made because they felt it wasn't necessary to determine if somebody was female before they were allowed to enter that women's category. Otherwise we would have continued to see development of testing and refining of tests, refining of the medical tests. And instead of that, they threw everything out and decided it didn't really matter. And I would say that runs along the lines of what we're seeing now, where the blurring between categories, the allowing of males who don't have any disorders but simply believe themselves to be women into women's categories and stuff like that. That's the same kind of drive where you minimise these differences. Now, of course, everyone wants equality, but equality doesn't mean we're all exactly physically the same. We know there's differences between men and women's bodies. It's unavoidable. Yes. And the reason for the existence of the female category in the first place is to allow women to compete and excel in our own categories, because if they were mixed, we would never win anything, so that has to be maintained. If they've decided there's a female category, which they have, why would you then allow males into it? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Sorcha, I must leave it there, but thank you so much for your time this morning. Thank you. Good morning to you. That's Sorcha Nic Lochlainn there, sports spokeswoman for the Countess advocacy.